The morning sun painted Lagos streets gold as yellow Danfo buses honked their way through traffic. Naomi stood in front of Peace and Joy Beauty Salon, her hands shaking as she checked the time on her small Nokia phone. In just 6 hours she would become Mrs. David Okonkwo, a name that still felt like a dream on her lips. "You're going to wear out that phone if you keep checking it," teased her best friend Adaora, who was helping her adjust the white lace wrapper around her waist. "The makeup artist will be here any minute." Naomi nodded, her mind drifting to that fateful day 8 months ago when she first met David. She had been a guest at her colleague's wedding, sitting quietly at one of the back tables when someone spilled palm wine on her best purple dress. That someone was David Okonkwo, looking handsome but clumsy in his designer agbada. "I'm so sorry," he had said, his deep voice filled with genuine concern. "Please, let me pay for the dress." "It's just palm wine," Naomi had replied, dabbing at the stain with a napkin. "It will wash out." But David wouldn't let it go. He sat with her the entire evening, making her laugh with stories about his adventures as a businessman. When he asked for her number, she almost said no. After all, what would a rich Lagos big boy want with a simple village teacher from Enugu state? Now, as the makeup artist transformed her face for her wedding day, Naomi remembered her mother's words when she brought David home to meet her parents. "My daughter," Ngozi had said, her weathered hands holding Naomi's, "love is beautiful. But marriage to a wealthy family is like swimming in a river full of crocodiles. You must be wise like a tortoise and strong like an eagle." Her father, Chukwuka, a retired school principal, had been more direct. "These city people, they look down on us villagers. Are you sure you're ready for this life?" The memory was interrupted by excited squeals as her bridesmaids arrived at the salon. The next few hours passed in a blur of activities, fixing her hair, applying makeup, and finally helping her into her wedding dress, a magnificent white gown that cost more than her yearly salary as a teacher. The ceremony was held at Holy Trinity Catholic Church, its massive doors thrown open to welcome hundreds of guests. The Okonkwo family had insisted on a big wedding. "We are not small people," David's mother, Nneka, had declared during the planning. Naomi's heart nearly stopped when she saw Nneka at the church entrance, resplendent in a gold and purple George wrapper with a matching jelly that reached toward the heavens. Her mother-in-law-to-be wore a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Naomi," Nneka called out, her voice sweet as honey but cold as ice. "You look acceptable. Let us thank God for small mercies." She turned to the wedding planner before Naomi could respond. "Make sure the village dancers don't come too close to the high table. We don't want them overwhelming our distinguished guests." Naomi felt her face burn with shame. The dancers were from her village, a special request she had made to honor her heritage. But before she could dwell on it, the church bells began to ring and her father took her arm. "Remember," he whispered as they prepared to walk down the aisle, "you are the daughter of proud people. Walk with your head high." The church fell silent as she entered. Naomi's eyes found David standing at the altar, tall and handsome in his black tuxedo. When their eyes met, his face broke into that same warm smile that had first captured her heart. In that moment, all her doubts melted away. But the peace was short-lived. During the traditional breaking of the kola nut after the church service, Nneka stepped in when Naomi was about to present the kola to the elders. "Oh no, my dear," Nneka announced loudly, taking the wooden bowl from Naomi's hands. "This is a delicate tradition. We can't risk any village mistakes. I'll do it myself." Naomi noticed the quick exchange of glances between the guests. Next to her, David squeezed her hand but remained silent. His sister Adaora smirked from her seat at the high table. The reception that followed was a grand affair at the prestigious Wheatbaker Hotel. The who's who of Lagos society filled the hall, their jewelry glinting under crystal chandeliers. Naomi recognized faces she'd only seen in newspapers: politicians, business tycoons, and celebrities. As she danced with David to the live band's highlife music, he pulled her close and whispered, "Don't mind Mama. She'll come around once she gets to know you better." Naomi nodded, but her heart felt heavy. As the evening wore on, she watched Nneka hold court among her friends, all of them stealing glances at the new bride. Their whispers seemed to follow her everywhere, like shadows in the corners of the beautifully decorated hall. When it was time for the traditional duties of a new wife, Naomi rose to serve David's family as custom demanded. But before she could begin, Nneka waved her away. "The servers we hired can handle this," she said loudly. "We're not in the village now, my dear. In Lagos, we do things differently." That night, as the celebration continued around her, Naomi sat beside her new husband, wearing a smile that masked her unease. She remembered her mother's words about crocodiles and realized that her wedding day was not just a celebration of love. It was the beginning of a battle for acceptance, in a world that seemed determined to remind her of her place. Yet, as David's hand found hers under the table, she squared her shoulders. She was no longer just Naomi, the village teacher. She was Mrs. Okonkwo now, and she would face whatever challenges came her way with grace and strength. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of her trials in the Okonkwo household. The gates of the Okonkwo mansion in Lekki swung open like the jaws of a silent beast. Naomi watched from the car window as their convoy pulled into the compound, her wedding dress carefully folded in her arms. The three-story building, with its gleaming white walls and gold-trimmed windows, would now be her home. "Welcome to your new life," David said proudly, helping her out of the car. But before Naomi could take in the beauty of the well-manicured garden, Nneka's voice cut through the evening air. "Ah, finally! I was beginning to think you'd stopped at every street corner to show off." Nneka emerged from the front door, having changed from her wedding outfit into a silk bubu. Come, the whole family is waiting." The family gathering in the massive living room felt more like a court session than a welcome. Adaora, David's father, sat in his favorite leather armchair like a king on his throne. He was a large man with kind eyes that seemed at odds with his reputation as one of Lagos's most ruthless businessmen. "Welcome, my daughter," Adaora said, his voice warm but tired. He looked at Naomi with what seemed like pity. Adaora, David's younger sister, sat on the plush sofa, scrolling through her iPhone with studied indifference. She looked up only to give Naomi a quick once-over, her perfectly manicured fingers tapping against her phone case. "I hope you don't mind sharing the kitchen with the cook," Adaora said sweetly, "though I doubt you're used to modern appliances in the village." Before Naomi could respond, Chioma, David's older brother's wife, walked in. Unlike the others, Chioma's smile seemed genuine as she hugged Naomi. "Don't let them intimidate you," Chioma whispered in her ear. "I've been there." The first week was a test of Naomi's patience. Every morning, she would wake up early to prepare breakfast for David, only to find Ga already in the kitchen instructing the cook, Mama Joy. "Oh, you're trying to cook," Nneka would say, examining Naomi's efforts with a critical eye. "The egg is too hard. David likes his eggs runny. And this tea, did you boil the water properly? In this house, we don't serve bush tea." One morning, while preparing jollof rice for lunch, Naomi heard Nneka's voice floating from the family room. "Can you believe she doesn't even know how to use the microwave properly? And her accent, every time she speaks, I feel like I'm watching one of those village movies." Adaora's laughter followed. "Did you see how she ate with her hands at dinner yesterday? So embarrassing. What was David thinking?" Naomi's hands trembled as she stirred the rice, the wooden spoon scraping against the bottom of the pot. The rice burned that day, and Nneka made sure everyone knew why. "You see?" Nneka announced at dinner. "This is what happens when you marry somebody who learned cooking over firewood." Even David's presence offered little comfort. He spent long hours at the office, and when he was home, his mother demanded his attention. "David, come help me plan the charity gala," or "David, we need to discuss the new business proposal." There was always something. One afternoon, while arranging flowers in the parlor, one of the few tasks Nneka allowed her to do, Naomi overheard a conversation between Adaora and her friend on the phone. "Yes, she's still here," Adaora said, not bothering to lower her voice. "Wearing her cheap wrapper around the house like we're in some rural market. I've told David he needs to upgrade her wardrobe, but she probably wouldn't know how to wear designer clothes anyway." The only person who showed her kindness was Chioma, who would sometimes invite her for tea in her private sitting room on the third floor. "When I first married my husband," Chioma shared one day, "Mama Nneka did the same to me. I was from Abuja, not rich enough, not Lagos rich, but look at me now. She gestured to her surroundings. You just need to grow thicker skin. But the final blow came during a family dinner when Naomi served her special oha soup, a recipe passed down from her grandmother. What is this village concoction? Nneka pushed her plate away. In this house, we eat continental dishes or properly prepared Nigerian meals. This is what house helps eat. Tears stunned Naomi's eyes as she watched Adaora dramatically dab her mouth with a napkin, making a show of being unable to eat the soup. That night, as she lay beside David in their room, she finally spoke up. Your mother? She doesn't like me. Don't say that, David replied, his eyes fixed on his laptop screen. Mama is just particular about things. You need to try harder to fit in. Maybe take some etiquette classes? Adaora knows a good instructor. Naomi turned away, her pillow soaking up silent tears. The mansion's air conditioning hummed softly, but she felt cold in a way that no warmth could cure. This beautiful cage, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, was becoming her prison. As she drifted off to sleep, she remembered her father's words about city people looking down on villagers. But she was here now, and she had to find a way to survive. Tomorrow would be another day of navigating the treacherous waters of her new life. Another day of trying to prove herself worthy of the Okonkwo name. Little did she know, the worst was yet to come. 3 months into her marriage, Naomi sat on the cold tile floor of her bathroom, staring at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. Her hands trembled as tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. After weeks of morning sickness and fatigue, she finally had confirmation. She was carrying an Okonkwo heir. When she showed David the test that evening, his face lit up with a joy she hadn't seen since their wedding day. He picked her up and spun her around their bedroom, his laughter echoing off the walls. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The family's reaction was mixed. Obiora smiled warmly and immediately called his friend who owned the best hospital in Victoria Island to arrange for Naomi's prenatal care. Adaora rolled her eyes and muttered something about village girls being good at one thing at least, but it was Nneka's reaction that changed everything. Ah, thank God! Nneka clasped her hands together in exaggerated relief. Now we must follow our traditional practices to protect the baby. You know, in prominent families like ours, there are always evil eyes watching. The next day, Nneka moved Naomi into a separate bedroom. It's our custom, she declared firmly. Pregnant women must not share a bed with their husbands. It's for the baby's protection. Her eyes glinted with satisfaction as she watched Naomi's belongings being moved out. But Mama, David protested weakly, surely these old practices. Old practices? Nneka cut him off sharply. Are you now ashamed of your heritage? Do you want your child to be born with problems because you followed modern ideas? That was the beginning of Naomi's isolation. Nneka instituted a series of traditional practices that effectively separated her from David. She wasn't allowed to eat dinner with the family. The evening spirit is dangerous for pregnant women. Couldn't attend family gatherings. Too much excitement is bad for the baby, and was told to limit her conversation with her husband. The baby can hear everything, and too much male energy is not good. One hot afternoon, as Naomi sat alone in the garden trying to find relief from her morning sickness, Uncle Babajide, the family driver who had served the Okonkwos for 20 years, approached her. My daughter, he said quietly, settling onto the bench beside her. I see history repeating itself. He looked around carefully before continuing. Before you, there was another woman in David's life. Her name was Priscilla. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. What happened to her? She was like you, kind, simple, truly loved our David. But Madame Nneka, he shook his head sadly. She said the girl was too plain, too common for her son. She did the same things she's doing to you now. Isolated her, criticized her, turned David against her with stories of bad dreams and spiritual warnings. The poor girl finally ran away, heartbroken. Uncle Babajide's words haunted Naomi, especially when she noticed how frequently Adaora began inviting her friend Priscilla to family gatherings. This Priscilla was nothing like David's ex. She was from a wealthy family, had studied abroad, and carried herself with the sophistication that Nneka so admired. Isn't she lovely? Nneka would say loudly whenever Priscilla visited. So well-bred, so cultured. the kind of woman who truly understands our social position. Naomi watched from the shadows as Priscilla laughed at all the right moments, spoke perfect English with no trace of a village accent, and wore expensive designer clothes that Adaora made sure to compliment loudly. Meanwhile, David's hours at the office grew longer. When Naomi called him, Nneka would often answer his phone. "He's in an important meeting, my dear," she would say. "Don't disturb him with small matters. Focus on keeping my grandchild safe." But one evening, Naomi overheard a different story as she passed by David's study. "Son," Nneka's voice drifted through the half-open door. "I had another dream last night. Your father's mother came to me, warning about the baby. She said there's a dark cloud, something about village spirits following your wife. Maybe you should stay away for a while, just to be safe." "Mama, these dreams of yours." David sounded tired. "Are you calling your mother a liar?" Nneka's voice rose. "After everything I sacrificed for you, if anything happens to this baby because you didn't listen to me." That night, David didn't come home at all. When Naomi called, he texted back, "Mama says you need rest. I'll sleep at the office tonight." The next morning, as Naomi fought another wave of morning sickness alone in her bathroom, she heard the house help, Asha, talking to Chioma in the corridor. "Madam, it's not right," Asha whispered urgently. "I overheard Madam Nneka and Miss Adaora planning with that Priscilla girl. They want to bring her to live in the house as a family friend. They say when a man sees what he's missing every day." "Shh." Chioma hushed her quickly. "These walls have ears." Naomi sank to the floor, her hands protectively covering her growing belly. The web of manipulation around her was growing tighter, and for the first time since her wedding day, she felt truly afraid. Not just for her marriage, but for the innocent life growing inside her. In the quiet of her lonely room, she whispered a prayer. Not for herself, but for her unborn child. Whatever game Nneka was playing, whatever schemes were being plotted in the shadows of this grand mansion, Naomi knew one thing for certain: she would fight for her baby's place in this family, even if it meant fighting alone. The sun set over Lagos, casting long shadows through the mansion's windows. Somewhere in the house, Nneka was probably plotting her next move. Adaora was likely messaging Priscilla, and David was working late again. But in her solitude, Naomi found a new strength stirring within her. The fierce determination of a mother protecting her child. Little did anyone know, this quiet strength would soon be tested in ways none of them could imagine. Naomi was alone in her room, folding baby clothes she had secretly bought from the market, when the first cramp hit. It started with a pain that shot through her like lightning. She doubled over, clutching her belly, her vision blurring with tears. "Help!" she screamed, but her voice seemed to echo in the empty darkness of her room. It was past midnight, and she had been isolated in the east wing of the mansion for weeks now. For the baby's protection, as Nneka had insisted. By the time Aisha heard her cries and rushed in, Naomi's wrapper was soaked in blood. The next few hours passed in a blur of ambulance sirens, hospital corridors, and doctors' grave faces. Through her haze of pain and fear, she heard fragments of conversations. The stress levels. Too high. Should have been monitored more closely. Nothing we could do. When Naomi finally opened her eyes in the sterile hospital room, the baby was gone. She had lost her precious child at 5 months. Her first thought was of David, but he wasn't there. Instead, Nneka stood at the foot of her bed, her face a mask of calculated grief. "You see?" Nneka's voice carried across the room like a cold wind. "I warned about this. The village gods followed you to Lagos. Your blood is not compatible with our family's destiny." Naomi lay there, too broken to respond, her empty womb feeling like a void that would never be filled. When David finally arrived hours later, his mother had already painted her narrative. "My son," Nneka wailed, clinging to him before he could reach Naomi's bedside. "I saw this coming in my dreams. Remember all my warnings about her village spirits? Now an innocent child has paid the price." David stood there, looking lost, his eyes not quite meeting Naomi's. Maybe Mama was right about the spiritual attacks," he mumbled, more to himself than to her. For days after returning to the mansion, Naomi moved through the halls like a ghost, her heart as empty as her arms that should have been holding her baby. The whispers followed her everywhere. "Bad luck," the housekeepers murmured when they thought she couldn't hear. Village curse. Adaora told her friends on the phone. I knew this would happen, Nneka declared to anyone who would listen. But fate had a way of revealing truth, even in the darkest moments. One evening, while Naomi sat in the garden trying to find peace among the flowers, Chioma burst out of the house, dragging Adaora by the arm. Show her, Chioma demanded, her voice trembling with rage. Show Naomi what I found in your room. In Chioma's other hand was a small leather pouch tied with red string, a juju charm notorious for causing misfortune. Adora's face had turned pale. I was just trying to protect our family, Adaora stammered, but her eyes couldn't meet Naomi's. Mama said we needed to test if she was really one of us. The revelation shook the household. But it was Isha, the quiet, observant house help, who delivered the final blow. Unable to bear the weight of her knowledge any longer, she approached Naomi in her room. Madam, Isha whispered, nervously wringing her hands, there is something you must know. That day before the baby, she swallowed hard. I heard Madam Nneka and Miss Adaora talking with Priscilla. They were making plans to bring her to live here. Madam Nneka said, once the baby is gone, David will see he needs a proper wife from a proper family. The words hit Naomi like physical blows. All this time, while she had been fighting to protect her unborn child, they had been plotting her downfall. The stress, the isolation, the constant psychological warfare, it hadn't been just cruelty, it had been a calculated plan. That evening, during dinner, something in Naomi finally broke. As Nneka began another speech about unfortunate village connections, Naomi rose from her chair, her hands shaking but her voice steady. Stop, she said, soft but clear. I know what you did. I know about the juju in my room. I know about your plans with Priscilla. The dining room fell silent. Nneka's fork clattered against her plate. How dare you accuse? Nneka began, but Naomi cut her off. My baby. Naomi's voice cracked with emotion. My innocent baby died because of your schemes. You isolated me, stressed me, plotted against me, all because I wasn't born into wealth. David stood up, his face ashen. What is she talking about, Mama? But before Nneka could respond, Chioma stepped forward. It's all true. I found the charm in Adaora's room, and Aisha heard everything, their plans, their plots, everything. The room erupted into chaos. Adaora burst into tears. Nneka started shouting about disrespect, but Naomi stood there, finally unburdened by the truth. Her baby was gone, but in its place was born a new strength. The strength to fight back against the forces that had tried to destroy her. As the truth unraveled like a loosened wrapper, Naomi watched her husband's face change from confusion to horror to shame. The perfect family image Nneka had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, and in its ruins lay the broken pieces of trust, love, and an innocent life lost to ambition and prejudice. The breaking point had come, but with it came the first rays of dawn after the longest night. Sometimes Naomi would later realize things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt into something stronger. The Okonkwo family dinner table had never felt so charged with tension. Crystal glasses clinked nervously, and the aroma of jollof rice and beef stew hung heavy in the air as Naomi sat straight-backed in her chair, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. Enough was enough. I have something to say, she announced, her voice carrying across the imported teak dining table. The usual dinner chatter died instantly. Nneka raised her eyebrows, a fork of rice suspended halfway to her mouth. Can't this wait? We have dignitaries coming tomorrow, and I need to discuss. No, Mama. Naomi's voice was quiet but steel-edged. It cannot wait. She turned to face the entire family. For months I have endured insults, schemes, and cruelty. I lost my baby because of the stress you put me through. And now I know about everything. The juju, the plans with Priscilla, all of it. The silence that followed was deafening. David's face had turned ashen, while Adaora suddenly found her plate fascinating. But it was Obiora who surprised everyone by speaking first. I have watched this family tear itself apart for too long, he said, placing his cutlery down with deliberate care. His usual silence broken, he turned to his wife. Nneka, your pursuit of social status has poisoned our home for years. Not just with Naomi. Remember how you drove away Janet, our first daughter-in-law? And how you nearly destroyed Samson's marriage, too? Nneka's face contorted with rage. How dare you? Everything I did was for this family's reputation. We can't have just anybody joining the Okonkwo name. And what has it gotten us? Obiora's voice rose unexpectedly. Our children can't make decisions without your approval. Our daughters-in-law live in fear. Our grandchild, his voice caught, our grandchild is gone because of your schemes. David, who had been unnaturally quiet, finally stood up. His hands were trembling. Mama, is it true? The charm in Adaora's room, was it your idea? Before Nneka could respond, Adaora burst into tears. I'm sorry, she wailed. Mama said we needed to test Naomi's spiritual strength. She said if Naomi was truly meant to be an Okonkwo, she would overcome any challenge. I didn't know it would go this far. The confession hung in the air like heavy smoke. David walked over to Naomi, kneeling beside her chair. My wife, his voice broke. Can you ever forgive me for being so blind? Naomi looked at her husband, seeing for the first time the pain and shame in his eyes. I love you, David, she said softly. But love without respect and support is like a beautiful flower without roots. It cannot survive. You see what you've done? Nneka suddenly shrieked, rising from her chair. Turning my own son against me. You village girls are all the same, using charms and sweet words to— Enough! Obiora's fist came down on the table, making the china rattle. Nneka, you will stop this madness now. Our family is not your personal kingdom to rule. These are our children, not your pawns. The room fell silent again, shock evident on every face. Never had they heard Obiora speak to his wife this way. Nneka sank back into her chair, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. I'm moving out, David announced firmly, taking Naomi's hand. We'll get our own place, somewhere we can heal and rebuild our marriage properly. But what about the family business? Nneka sputtered. I can manage the business without living under your shadow, Mama, David replied. It's time for all of us to grow up. To everyone's surprise, Adaora stood up next. Her mascara was streaked with tears, but her voice was steady. I need to apologize properly, she said, looking at Naomi. I was jealous. You had something I didn't. True love, simplicity, peace. Instead of learning from you, I tried to destroy you. I'm so sorry, sister. The walls of prejudice and pride that had seemed so insurmountable began to crack. One by one, the truth poured out. Years of manipulation, of forced obedience, of destroyed relationships. Nneka sat silent, watching as her carefully woven web of control unraveled thread by thread. 2 weeks later, Naomi and David moved into their own apartment in Lekki Phase 1. It was smaller than the family mansion, but filled with something the big house had lacked. Peace. They began marriage counseling, learning to communicate and stand together against life's challenges. Nneka, faced with the consequences of her actions, found herself increasingly isolated. The weekly family dinners she had ruled over were now held in different homes with different rules. Slowly, painfully, she began to realize that controlling others had only led to losing them. 6 months after the confrontation, at a small family gathering in David and Naomi's new home, something remarkable happened. Nneka arrived last, looking smaller somehow, more human. Naomi, she said quietly, as everyone held their breath, I brought something. From her bag, she pulled out a worn cookbook. These are my mother's recipes. She was a village woman too. I'd forgotten that. Perhaps you'd like to learn them? It wasn't a grand apology, but in the Okonkwo family, it was a beginning. Naomi accepted the book with grace, understanding that sometimes healing comes in small steps. As they all sat down to eat, Naomi looked around at her family. Imperfect, healing, but finally real. She had lost much in this battle, but she had gained something precious. The power of standing up for oneself, the strength of forgiveness, and the wisdom to know that true family is built not on names or status, but on love, respect, and acceptance. The sun set over Lagos, casting a warm glow through the windows of their new home. In its light, Naomi saw not the end of a tragedy, but the beginning of a new story. One where love triumphs over pride, truth over pretense, and where even the deepest wounds can heal with time and understanding. The story of Naomi and the Okonkwo family teaches us that when family members become too involved in a marriage, they can turn sweet wine into bitter water. Nneka's constant meddling and schemes didn't just hurt Naomi. They poisoned her own relationship with her children. Sometimes, the desire to control others comes from our own fears and insecurities. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Goodbye.